Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. And we're really looking forward to a very dynamic, exciting session right now and later this afternoon. But it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Paul Griffiths, who's the CEO of Dubai Airports. I think everybody has got to know Paul very well over the last few weeks, who's been a great ambassador for what is the third busiest airport in the world, busier than Chicago here and just behind Beijing and Atlanta. So we're very proud of what's been achieved by Dubai Airports, how it has gone forward since the opening of Terminal 3 by Paul some years ago, very successfully, very seamlessly, and it is something that I know as a hotelier. Air travel is the main artery of our success in our business, in that we have people who come on staycations, but we always need international travel, both into the country and indeed as a great hub. So there's plenty to talk about, and we have a very seasoned journalist here at the anchor in Bloomberg Television, Manus Cranny. Thank you so much for coming today, Manus. And I'm sure he's going to have some interesting questions and a great discussion with Paul. At the same time, unusually, we're also going to put up a number, which there it is now, which instead, if you're a bit too shy to go up to the microphone, if you have any questions, you can send us this to this WhatsApp number, and if everything works properly, Manus will be able to read it on his mobile. So if you see him looking at his mobile, it means he's getting questions. So please do give us the questions. We'd love to make it as interactive as possible. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for coming here this afternoon. And most of all, thank you, Paul, and thank you, Manus.
Jared, thank you very much. And I must say, you know, when I arrived here in Dubai, I mean, I've been coming for a long time, but Jared made me very, very welcome and created these kind of relationships that we have with the likes of Paul and a number of other people here. And I think that's the fantastic thing about Dubai. You know, there is a community here. We open, we talk to one another. And Paul, very gracious of you to come here today to the Arabian travel market. I've traveled a couple of times in the past 2 weeks to Switzerland and to the Seychelles. And I am struggling, I would say, at best, to grapple with COVID tests, costs, and time. As we evolve, how do you see the new normal? Will there be a new normal of travel, Paul, or will we get back to what we used to have?
Well, I don't think that the term new normal really applies, because normalization is when something becomes familiar, and therefore it can't really be new. So hopefully travel will be as seamless as it's been before. In fact, one could argue perhaps even better than before, because COVID-19, unfortunately, has been an accelerator of so many things that actually we've been grappling with for years. I mean, COVID-19 passports, for example, are now possible because the technology has had to advance. So I think that what's going to happen is that all of that horrid passenger-facing bureaucracy that we dealt with for years is now being accelerated by technological change, and that will actually make travel as good, if not better, than it was before. That's the idea anyway. That's what we're working on.
Okay, let's dig in a little bit more to vaccine passports, because it is quite a big issue for us all. Are you going to have to convince us that we can give you all of our health data and feel very robust? Have you got a bigger job to do convincing me to use a vaccine passport, or will I just willingly give you everything?
Well, I think the thing is, what I've got to do is, first of all, convince you that I do not need your data, because there's a big myth at the moment about us having our privacy invaded by giving up sovereignty over our health data. But actually, when you go into a coffee shop to buy a coffee, you're not giving your personal wealth statement to the barista who's making your cappuccino. All you're doing is handing over your credit card or your phone, in a lot of cases now, which goes bleep. And when you get that bleep, all that's happened is a transaction has gone back to your bank and has asked, is this person good for 10 dirhams? And if that is a red, no. If it's a green, that's fine. That's all we're looking for. Have you got the appropriate health credentials to undertake the journey to the destination to which you're going? We don't need to know your health status. I just need to be informed by the authority that is monitoring your health back in your own country or wherever it is, that you're good to go.
Now, you and I caught up yesterday, and you said, look, we are looking at technology. I want to know how close you are to rolling that out. And how do you scale that up? Is it that Dubai Airports Authority adopts an app and that you get Heathrow, Gatwick, O'Hare all on board? I mean, that is not a singular task for Dubai Airports. Talk me through where we are and where you are on scalability and adoption.
Sure. Well, there are three component parts. There's the back end, which is probably the most difficult bit, and that is getting all the various health authorities that store our data to be IT enabled, to be able to give that red or green signal, yes, you can pass, or no, you can't, into that sort of middleware. Now, IATA, the International Air Transport Association, are pioneering that technology, and they're very close, I think, to an app that's ready now. And then the front end, quite honestly, is possibly the easiest bit. And one of the most encouraging things was the announcement that Apple Wallet and Google Pay were going to play a part in this. Because if we could have the same ubiquity that we've got with credit and payment cards on our phones available to facilitate biometric paperless travel, then we'll be in great shape. And one could argue that the technology needed to process a bank transaction is more complex and needs to be more secure than a health yes or no.
So if you have that trifecta of Apple, IATA, and Google, that is the answer to scale.
I think it is, because it's ubiquity that we're looking for.
Are you going to be the first to roll it out? I've got my Al Hassan app, which it's gold. I get one every week now. I get a COVID test every week. That's Bloomberg. Will it be similar to that?
It will be similar to that. In fact, there are prototypes already available, so you can see exactly what it looks like. It basically takes all of the data that you currently store, including your facial recognition profile. It reads the barcode on your passport to take that data, and it sort of triangulates the data to make it absolutely certain that it is you that's traveling, and then reconciles that in the background with the data held by the health authorities.
This is the capacity to rip out an entire layer of costs from your business.
Well, I think the good thing is, because it's scalable and most of this is actually fairly modest sunk cost in an app, it's not going to be too... I mean, if you think back, the red carbon we used to get all over our clothes when we had to travel with tickets, that disappeared overnight because of an IATA application where ticketless travel and tickets just were eliminated because the industry took a move. And that didn't involve a massive cost increase in the cost of air travel. One could argue, actually, it's created an economy of scale that's reduced the cost of the transaction. So it's a similar industry initiative across a broader scale that will bring us biometric travel, which isn't an invasion of privacy and is so much simpler and easier. We'll be sitting here in a year's time and you'll be saying, do you know, I think it's embarrassing that I asked you a question about whether biometric travel would be an intrusion into our privacy.
Listen,
Promise you that.
They know everybody knows where we are. Everybody
Absolutely.
knows what we're doing literally every moment of the day. And if you think that you're giving up some great privacy, you're not, whether you've got an iPhone or a Samsung. Okay, so that's the nirvana, as it were, or the new world order. But the world is not created equal. There is a bifurcation, it's my favorite word at the moment, between the East and the West, or developing markets and, let's say, emerging markets and developed markets. And that is people who have access to vaccine. And there are many, many countries who haven't got, the kind of rapid access that we need for scale versus, let's say, developed markets which do. That ultimately, or for your business and for tourism here in the kingdom, it's a cap. For as long as that bifurcation exists, there's a cap on us getting back to anywhere near 83 million people going through your airport.
There is obviously a couple of hurdles to overcome, but I would argue that neither of those is a travel industry problem to be dealt with. First of all, the people that are not comfortable with being vaccinated, that's going to be a life choice for people. And I've had quite a bit of correspondence from people who are quite opposed to the concept of biometric passports on the basis that they don't believe in the vaccine. The problem is, of course, travel is something that the vast majority of people regard as a great social and economic benefit. And of course, you can opt out of it. I mean, chances are that statistically, there's one person in this hall today that didn't use my airport to come here. But the vast majority, 96% of people did. So if you are serious about wanting to get back to the degree of mobility we had before, then I'm afraid that the protection of the majority is going to be the agenda that prevails. On the vaccine issue, I agree it's a problem, and I don't like the idea of creating any form of divide. I think COVID-19, unfortunately, has created a great deal of unpleasant divides in the world.
Yes.
And this is not a travel discrimination issue. This is a human issue about the distribution of vaccines. And I think a lot of the richer countries have really got to help the poorer countries get the degree of access to vaccine that the West has had so far.
This is also about confidence in the destinations where you travel to. I've just returned from the Seychelles. 60-odd% are vaccinated. Yes, they are struggling a little bit with cases at the moment. 60-odd% of the population are vaccinated. We have a Bloomberg story today that Sinopharm are going to, here in the UAE, we're going to be getting a third shot if you have Sinopharm. How important is that messaging, let's say for you, for your airport, to the world? Come to Dubai, not only do we have a huge rolling out of vaccine, but we're taking an extra step. We're going to give people a third shot because we think that that's what's needed.
Well, I think, first of all, remember that the travel industry itself, airports, airlines, won't be making up the rules. No. That will be down to the health authorities of the receiving country. So, in other words, if the US, the UK, or wherever in the world, the UAE, has a particular set of entry requirements that it wishes to apply, then we are the implementers of that. But I can give you a very good example, and hopefully most people have experienced it, that there are 28 countries on the list which, for medical security, need an additional PCR test on arrival here. But instead of putting you in a hotel for 10 days and testing you twice and charging you a huge amount for the privilege of both the hotel that you don't want to stay in and the PCR test, the government here has provided a rapid PCR test for free on arrival for those that require it. And it's done on arrival, it's done at scale, so queuing isn't an issue. And we've just opened, and it's just about to go into service, a laboratory on premise, close to Terminal 2, where PCR tests will be processed at the airport, and results typically should be available between 3 or 4 hours. So when you compare the arrangements that have been made to adapt to the need to provide the degree of medical security for arriving passengers that we've done, we can do it at scale. We've not passed the burden on to the traveller, and therefore that's kept Dubai right at the top of the list in terms of desirable places to come, because we've tried to keep the medical security aspects of this as unobtrusive as we possibly can.
Is this data, information, processes and construct that you're sharing with the UK authorities at the moment?
We are sharing the data with the UK authorities. However, I'm not convinced that they are giving us the time of day that they should be giving us. Quite honestly, we've
That's
done
a very strong
so much.
statement. You're not convinced that the UK authorities are giving you the time of day that you need. Expand.
Well, the thing is, you see, that if you look at all the measures that we've taken, and hopefully a lot of people will have actually witnessed this, yourself included, Mans, you know, we've taken huge amounts of steps here. The government's program to lock down very early on in a very draconian way I think was a very inspired judgment, because it actually kept the number of cases per capita during the first wave much below the world average. The desire to get onto the vaccination program at a very early stage, and we're only just behind Israel as the number one country for vaccinations per capita now. That clearly was a measure to try and make absolutely sure we were doing everything we could. And then all of the various physical distancing measures, I think the UAE, in retrospect, will be seen as having got most of those things very, very right. But the difficulty, of course, is if you look at the rate of positive cases from countries arriving in the UK, I don't think the UAE has been fairly placed on the red list. They may have their reasons for doing that, but I really don't think we belong on that list. I think there are countries that are either on the green list or the amber list that haven't done half of the measures that we've done.
So when we caught up on TV yesterday, you said you thought it was sort of more political angst rather than anything else. But I am duty bound to say Sheikh Ahmed, who runs Emirates, said to me he was hopeful that we get some progress next week. You intimated that as well. Why are you hopeful? And do you really believe we'll go to amber next week in the UK, from the UAE to the UK?
Well, the next decision date's the 28th of May. And at that point, there will be a decision as to whether we stay on the red list or we go onto the amber list, or hopefully onto the green list. We've been assured that it's data-driven. Now, if the data that's coming out of the UAE at the moment continues its current trend, I would suggest that infection rates are down at about 1,200 a day now. That I think is of sufficient confidence and inspiring levels to be able to give the UK the confidence to get us back on the at least the amber, if not the green list.
Do you believe that we need a Swiss-style disclosure? I've been in and out of Switzerland actually twice in the past year. Oh, that's exciting. But it's a very clear system. It's a very, very clear online system. They tell you when you're going to fall off the list. It's a very clear disclosure and process. Do you feel that we will get that from the United Kingdom?
I don't think we will. I think the clear indication from the communications that have come out of the UK so far is that there are too many moving parts here. And you know, if you look at the UK government's agenda, you can't say it's unreasonable, because they've taken the stance that the protection of the UK population is their obvious primary priority. I just think that the methodology of deciding whether the risk is increased by allowing arrivals from certain countries is not actually getting the prominence that it needs, because the balance between the social and economic impact versus the health risk, I don't think is being properly considered in the right proportion at the moment. Time will improve that, I think.
Look, you and the team have worked through many, many cycles at Dubai airports and in this city and the evolution thereof. So take me to how you envisage travel, the next thing. Everybody's talking about I can work from anywhere. I met some kids that were living in the Seychelles for the past 9 months. They were working from a hotel, very chilled. Their life went on. The world of work is changing. How we work, where we can live will change. So take me to your blue sky thinking in terms of what that might all mean for travel, because everybody's talking it down and it's hard and it's expensive and blah, blah, blah. But I would say that there is potentially a shift to even more mobility as we go forward. What do you think?
I think the experience of this will be life-changing for virtually everyone on the planet. One of the things I'm very grateful not to have to do is to get up an unearthly hour in the UK in the middle of February when it's dark, when it's cold, and then sit across a crowded train facing a lot of other ashen-faced people heading to the city to work every day. Now we've got to a state of technological development that is not only undesirable, but completely uneconomic. We build transport systems, we build cities around peak utilization, and that's incredibly expensive to do. If you could spread travel out through the day and give people the freedom of mobility, then you would not need half the road systems, half the airports, you could even say, if actually you had a more technologically enlightened way of people working and socializing. And I think what's happened is that ability to do that has been enabled by video conferencing now. So everyone says, well, people are not going to travel for business anymore, so it's dreadful for the aviation industry. But actually, I would say that I remember being told that, when nuclear energy was going to be plentiful, we wouldn't need to spend money on insulating our homes. When computers were invented, we'd have 5 days a week on the golf course because the computers would do the work in 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
But none of that's happened. All that's happened is, instead of waiting 2 weeks for an answer to a typed letter, we get an email response in an hour. So the pace of business and life has intensified based on the technological development. So again, in another dimension, travel will be transformed because of the capability. People have got to be more flexible. So more people will come to live here, to enjoy the lifestyle here. And I think a lot of people will be geographically released from that historical need to live and work within a commutable distance. So I think the future for humanity, enabled by the technology we're seeing now, is actually a better prospect than it's been for some time.
Do you think, just hold that thought, not one of you have used the WhatsApp number? Not one of you. So you've all failed. No, have you? Okay. Sherry, Anne should be sending me your questions now. You can always walk up to the microphone if you'd like to. Do you feel brave enough to walk to the microphone, one of you? Go on. Oh, hold on, here we go. Paul, let's ask you a question from the audience. You're saved from another question of mine. Here we go. So, what are the challenges that the aviation industry face in the next coming months, besides the travel restrictions due to COVID, and how do you overcome them?
Well, first of all, I think one of the problems is no matter how ready we are to recover, and I can tell you that the entire aviation industry here is like a coiled spring, ready to respond to the slightest easing of restrictions, and mobilizing the capacity of the airport and the airlines is something we're braced to do, because my belief is that the recovery will be very, very rapid indeed. The problem is we don't know where that tipping point will come, because the difficulty...
Have you got the staff on standby? I mean, where are you operationally? Have you got staff on standby in pools and you're ready to go?
Indeed. Within 7 days, we can reopen Terminal 1. And we've mobilized everything, and we've changed the way we work with our suppliers to be ready to do that. So Terminal 1, which obviously is the one of our 3 terminals that's currently in suspended animation almost, that will be open within 7 days of us requiring.
How many people is that, Paul, formally, and how many people will it be now?
It would be all of the airlines except for Emirates and Fly Dubai, and those in Terminal 2. So it's pretty much all of the foreign airlines that served DXB operate from Terminal 1. So that's a big chunk of capacity. And then, of course, the A380 terminal, which is also in hibernation, that needs about 3 weeks to bring back into operation. But we're ready to go. And if we open Terminal 1 first, I imagine what's going to happen as the recovery comes, we'll be giving notice to open T3. It only takes a bit longer because there's a railway involved between the two, which needs a little bit longer to bring out of hibernation. So we're ready to go. And all we need now is the easing of restrictions to the major markets to come. And once that starts to happen, it won't be a trickle, it will be a flood.
And that's UK, India, and
UK,
South Africa?
Indian subcontinent, United States, Australasia. I mean, most of the major long-haul markets that we serve are under either closed border or travel restrictions.
If those 3-4 markets open, can you get back to find my number? It's Bloomberg. 86.3 million people, which you had in 2019. Can you do that number?
Well, I think the thing is, look, over time, we could easily mobilize back to, I mean, we were, as you say, our capacity is around about 95 million, 100 million maybe. we could easily mobilize that capacity within a month.
Couple of short, sharp shocks. Do you think business travelers will be back at the level you saw in 2019? And this is the great debate, isn't it? Whether I need to go 4 times to Japan or 2. Do you reckon we'll go back to the same level on business travel?
I think that it's very difficult to tell, because I think, as I've described, the whole business travel potential is going to be difficult to read. My personal feeling is that there will be less business travel per business activity, but the intensification of business activity because of the technological change, particularly with video conferencing being so easy now, that there will be more business activity. So I expect probably the same level of business travel, but the intensity of business will change, because it has done with every other technical change that we've experienced.
Okay. I couldn't upgrade with points. I was very disappointed. So business class was full, and I love the new Premier Economy. It's gorgeous. Right. While we are being told that PCR test is required if vaccinated, we are told that we then develop immunity 6 to 9 months later. So does it mean that antibody testing will become the next stage of keeping health security?
Well, I think the thing is, if we do manage to get the biometric vaccine passports up and running across the world, the evidence of a vaccine will be possibly a substitute for the PCR test over time.
Michael O'Leary was with me the other day, and of course, you know, Michael's always great for a headline, and he said, well, Manus, he said, I see vaccine passports usurping PCR tests in 3 months. Could you see it in less time scale, let's say, for Dubai?
Well, as you know, we've already got applications active now that show your vaccination status. If other countries are doing similar things, and I've heard that they are, all we need is to join that up. And hopefully through the IATA Act, we will be able to join those up. And if that's an entry requirement into a country and that's specified instead of quarantine and PCR tests, then it's going to make travel so much easier. We'll all be able to travel then, and that will be a good thing.
Indeed. I'm trying to get Michael O'Leary to come and do a panel on airlines here, but let's see. Now, what are the impossibilities of presence which shall be imperatives of the future? Dr. Mustafa Sassa, what are the impossibilities of the present which will become imperatives of the future? This is a very, very sort of philosophical question, Dr. Mustafa.
Right, the improbabilities of the present for the being the probabilities of the future. I mean, that's a very broad question, and I could go on for either very short time.
I'm going to save you from that. Where are we on time? Because you know we're trucking along here. Any other questions coming through? Okay, why not have a travel corridor for residents of the UAE? If you tuned into Bloomberg yesterday, you'd have got the answer to this. Why do we not have a travel corridor for residents from the UAE to the UK, only taking the hub issue out of the equation? But I talked to you about this yesterday. Please clarify it for the audience. Everybody's saying, oh, you're going to open up DWC. You're going to take everybody with the UK passport, shove us all out there. I have 2 passports. Put us all out there and fly us out.
Right, okay. Well, first of all, it's driven by the decision of entry by the country that you're travelling to. We'd love, obviously, to get whatever concession we would like from various countries to enable travel again, and that's something that we are working very actively on. I do believe that the data, as I said at the beginning, the data that's now emerging, if we are kept on the amber or red list, then the motivation to do that will not be data-driven, and we've been promised that the decisions are data-driven. So I think the thing is that if we could get onto the amber or green list, then that would not require that to happen. But the difficulty, of course, is that trying to negotiate bilateral arrangements around groups of people is sort of not really sort of intellectually sound, because COVID-19 is a great leveler. You know, unfortunately, you cannot prescribe who's more likely to be infected and not. Everyone has to have a test. If the UK requires vaccine evidence, everyone will have to produce that. So it can't be discriminatory, and we are reliant on the confidence levels of those destination countries. being high enough to believe that what we're doing here is the right thing.
Could you envisage a situation where some core nations, the UK or in Europe, say you can't come in if you don't have a vaccine? I mean, that would be an incredible step. Could you even envisage that?
It would not be a good position for the world to be in, but I think the solution to that is the more equitable distribution of vaccines, and the fact that the relaxation of the patents, which will enable the vaccines to be produced more widely and distributed more widely, is the panacea for that problem, in my view.
Now, Terminal 1 is in suspended animation, you say, but what are the plans for DWC?
Well, clearly, we do not, in our projections, we think it's going to be 2024 before travel returns to the previous volume that we saw in 2019. I think also there is an additional angle here across the world, because I think what has accelerated during the pandemic has the awareness of the environmental impacts. And we've all seen, kangaroos in the streets of Sydney, mountain goats in Wales, those satellite images of China without traffic, all building, I think, the awareness of the environmental challenges of mobility and travel. And I think we're going to have to turn our attention to that. And I think across the world, that's going to make it more difficult to expand a lot of aviation infrastructure. Now, however, I think the technological change of what we're seeing is going to enable us to use the existing assets that we've got more productively. And I think one of the best measures of an airport experience is how can I minimize the time in which I inflict my airport product on my customers. We're probably one of the few products in the world where the less we interact with our customers, we have higher satisfaction. And I think the thing is, it's that how quickly can I get from my plane to my taxi test that is what most arriving passengers want to see, and how late can I leave it to get to the airport to get my plane, similarly, is quite a good measure of satisfaction on departure. And there's a benefit in that, because if you can increase the throughput twice, so you can get 90,000 passengers instead of 45,000 passengers through the same space, because they're taking only half the time to get through that, then I've actually improved not only my product, but the utilization of my infrastructure. So if we turn to technology to increase throughput, then we can use our airports more intensively and create a better product. And I think that's going to be the focus for perhaps the next 10 years. And in fact, even before the pandemic hit, we just approved a 2030 plan to increase the capacity of DXB to 120 million. And that buys us a bit more time to invest in the longer term investment of a new airport. So DWC, the timescales, I think, may shift a bit, and the pandemic clearly is going to play a part in that. But the idea is that the original objective of providing enough capacity for Dubai to continue to grow its communications network across the globe, that capacity will continue to be provided by a combination of DXB and DWC for the foreseeable future.
You might find there's an Irishman that runs duty free that might be a bit vexed with you, with your desire to communicate with us less.
But again, you see, the technology is changing, because the average time you've got when you run duty free to influence a customer to buy is about 14 to 20 minutes, something like that. But if we were able, as you can now with technology, to digitize the entire duty-free catalogue and put that in front of them on the in-flight TV screen for 8 hours before arrival, isn't that a much better sales platform than quickly grab this bottle, pay here, and off you go?
I hope the movie selection usurp the duty-free selection. We're going to close off. Jared's coming towards us. I just want to close off with one other concept, which I talked to a lot of CEOs about, which is how much less square footage are you going to use for offices? This flexibility. Are you going to offer the staff, the operational staff that were office bound, more flexibility, and will you need less square footage yourself to run the business?
Well, actually, if I can broaden the question a bit,
Of course.
actually, the sad thing here is that we've taken a massive reduction in our staff numbers, 34%. Now, clearly, a lot of those are operational staff that will ramp up again.
Yes.
But we've changed the whole relationship with our supply chain now, so we don't need the number of office-based staff that we were employing before,
Right.
because of the change of technology. So that obviously has had a consequential impact on the need for office space, and I think you'll find that that trend is being echoed around the world now. I mean, it means we don't need to build more office space. It means that the office space we currently got will last us for a huge period for further operational expansion.
Paul, thank you very much. Finally, we may meet beyond the virtual platform, which has been a pleasure. I'd like to thank Gerard Lawless for inviting me to come and join you today. Paul, thank you very much. Paul Griffiths, the CEO of Dubai Airports.
Thank you.